My name is Marcus Reed. I'm 32 years old. I grew up in West Baltimore, where my mother cleaned office buildings at night, and my father drove a delivery truck until his back gave out. They taught me that love meant showing up every single day, that consistency was its own kind of poetry. For 3 years I thought I'd found someone who understood that. Her name was Simone Carter, and she was the kind of woman who could walk into a room and immediately rearrange its gravity. Everything bent toward her, including me. Simone worked in pharmaceutical sales, the type of job where your wardrobe costs more than most people's rent, and your calendar is color-coded by importance. I'm a civil engineer for the city's infrastructure department. I design the bridges people drive over without thinking twice. I make sure the water runs clean through pipes buried under streets no one remembers to thank. It's not glamorous work, but it matters. At least I always thought it mattered. That night at Rouge, an upscale French restaurant in Harbor East, I had a ring in my jacket pocket that weighed more than its actual 2 carats. The box pressed against my ribs like a second heartbeat. I'd saved for 8 months, skipped lunches, took on weekend consulting gigs. The ring was platinum with a center diamond that caught light like a promise. Simone had paused in front of that exact ring at a boutique on Charles Street 6 months earlier, her fingers hovering over the glass case. She didn't say anything, but I saw the way her breath caught. I remembered everything about her. That was my mistake. We sat at a corner table with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. The sunset was doing that thing where it turns the water into liquid gold. Simone wore a black dress that hugged her like a second skin and gold jewelry that whispered expensive with every movement. Her 2 closest friends, Vanessa and Kira, sat on either side of her like ladies-in-waiting. They were already 3 cocktails deep, and the laughter was getting louder, sharper. Vanessa was telling some story about a junior associate at her law firm who'd accidentally sent a text meant for his girlfriend to the entire company Slack channel. The table erupted. Simone threw her head back, and her laugh cut through the restaurant's ambient jazz like breaking glass. "I would have died," she said, wiping at the corner of her eye. "Literally just collapsed on the spot. Some people are not built for high-pressure environments." Kira leaned in conspiratorially. "Speaking of not built for pressure, did you hear about Jonathan from your old office?" Simone's eyes lit up. "Oh, God, no. What did he do?" "Proposed to Angela at the company retreat, in front of everyone. She said no and then quit the next week. The 3 of them howled. I felt my stomach tighten. I tried to smile, tried to laugh along, but something about the cruelty in their amusement made my hands go cold." Simone caught my expression and reached across the table to squeeze my wrist. "Baby, you look so serious. Relax, we're celebrating." I nodded, swallowed. "Celebrating what?" "Life," she said, as if that explained everything. The waiter brought another round of drinks. I hadn't touched my first glass of wine. My throat felt like it had been lined with sandpaper. This was supposed to be the night. I'd planned everything down to the minute. I'd called ahead to make sure we got this exact table. I'd asked the waiter to bring champagne after I proposed. I'd even written a speech on a note card that I'd memorized and then thrown away because I wanted it to sound natural. But sitting there, watching Simone perform for her friends, I felt something I'd been ignoring for months finally surface. The feeling that I was an accessory in her life, a dependable backdrop. the sturdy, boring foundation she could build her glamorous existence on without ever having to see. I stood up before I could talk myself out of it. The chair scraped against the floor. Simone looked up mid-sentence, surprised. "Where are you going?" I didn't answer. I walked around the table and lowered myself onto one knee beside her chair. The restaurant didn't go silent like it does in movies. Most people didn't even notice, but Vanessa's eyes went wide. Kira gasped and grabbed Simone's arm. I pulled the ring box from my pocket and opened it. The diamond caught the candlelight and fractured it into 1,000 tiny promises. My hands were shaking, but my voice came out steady. "Simone Carter," I said, "for 3 years you've been the most exciting, unpredictable part of my life. You've taught me that love doesn't have to be quiet or simple. You've made me want to be better, bolder, braver." I took a breath. "I love you. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up every morning and choose you. Will you marry me?" For a split second, I thought I saw something soft in her eyes, something real. But then her mouth opened, and what came out wasn't a gasp, or a yes, or even a tender no. It was laughter. High-pitched, disbelieving, almost hysterical laughter. She clapped a hand over her mouth, but the sound kept coming, leaking out between her fingers. Vanessa's smile froze. Kira looked away. People at nearby tables started turning to look. Simone lowered her hand slowly. Her face twisted into an expression I'd never seen before. It was pity mixed with amusement, mixed with something sharper, disbelief. "Marcus," she said, and my name sounded wrong in her mouth. "Are you serious right now?" I felt the floor tilt. "Of course I'm serious. I love you." She shook her head slowly, like I was a child who just asked if clouds were made of cotton candy. "Marcus, baby, you're so sweet. You really are. But come on." She gestured at me with one manicured hand. "You thought I was actually going to marry you?" The words hit me like a fist to the chest. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. She kept talking. "You're a city engineer, Marcus. You make what? 70,000 a year. You drive a used Honda. You still have student loans." Her voice was rising now, taking on a theatrical edge. "I'm building an empire. I'm going places. And you thought, what? That I'd settle?" Vanessa reached out and touched Simone's arm. "Simone, stop. Stop." But Simone shook her off. She was on a roll now, performing for the growing audience. She turned to Kira and said, loud enough for half the restaurant to hear, "Imagine thinking I'd marry him." The 4 words hung in the air like smoke. Imagine thinking I'd marry him. Not you. Him. Like I wasn't even a person. Just an object. A mistake. A punchline. I saw pity in the eyes of strangers. I saw a woman 2 tables over cover her mouth in shock. I saw the waiter freeze mid-step, unsure whether to intervene. And I saw myself clearly for the first time in 3 years. I'd been so busy trying to earn Simone's love that I'd never stopped to ask if it was worth earning. I'd confused her tolerance for affection, her convenience for commitment. I closed the ring box with a soft click that somehow cut through the noise. The sound was final, absolute. I stood up slowly. My knees felt weak, but I didn't let it show. I reached into my wallet, pulled out 3 20s, and placed them on the table next to Simone's untouched entree. "That's for my half of the appetizers," I said quietly. My voice didn't shake. It didn't crack. It was calm, steady, the voice of a man who just made a decision. Simone's smile faltered. "Marcus, wait. You're absolutely right," I said. "You deserve someone who matches your ambition. Someone who sees you the way you see yourself." I picked up my jacket from the back of my chair. "I hope you find him." I turned and walked toward the exit. Behind me, I heard Vanessa say something sharp and low. I heard Kira's voice rise in protest. I heard Simone call my name once, twice, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped into the cool Baltimore night. The air smelled like salt and exhaust and freedom. I didn't cry until I got to my car. I sat in the driver's seat in the parking garage, hands gripping the steering wheel, and let the grief pour out of me in silent, shaking waves. I mourned the version of myself who'd believed love was something you could earn through effort. I mourned the 3 years I'd spent trying to be enough for someone who'd never seen me at all. Then I drove to my apartment in Fells Point, parked in my usual spot, and went inside. The place was small. A one-bedroom with old radiators and windows that rattled when the wind blew. But it was mine. I'd furnished it carefully over the years. A leather chair I'd found at an estate sale. A bookshelf I'd built myself. A kitchen table where I ate breakfast every morning and read the news. Simone had always hated this apartment. She called it charmingly vintage, in a tone that meant outdated and embarrassing. She'd been pushing me to move into her place in Federal Hill, a modern condo with floor-to-ceiling windows and a doorman who knew her by name. I'd been on the verge of saying yes. Now, standing in my small, sturdy apartment, I felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost knocked me over. I didn't block Simone's number. I didn't delete her contact or her photos. I simply stopped responding. When she texted me the next morning, "We need to talk," that was a misunderstanding. I read the message and set my phone down. When she called that afternoon, I let it go to voicemail. When she showed up at my apartment 3 days later, I didn't answer the buzzer. My coworker Adrian noticed the change first. "You seem different," he said one morning over coffee in the break room. "Lighter." I shrugged. "Just taking care of myself." He nodded slowly. "Whatever it is, keep doing it." I started running in the mornings along the harbor. I signed up for a woodworking class at a community center in Canton. I had dinner with my parents every Sunday and listened to my mother's stories about the people she'd met at the church bake sale. I existed in my own life for the first time in years. 2 months later, I heard through a mutual friend that Simone had started dating a venture capitalist named Derek. They'd met at a networking event. He drove a Tesla and owned a penthouse in Mount Vernon. The friend told me this cautiously, watching my face for a reaction. I felt nothing. Not anger, not jealousy. Just a distant clinical curiosity. "Good for her," I said. And I meant it. 3 months after that, the same friend called me at work. "You need to hear this," she said. "Simone and Derek broke up. Badly. I didn't ask for details, but she gave them anyway. Derek had been seeing 2 other women the entire time. When Simone found out, she'd confronted him at a charity gala in front of 200 people. He'd laughed at her, called her overly dramatic and exhausting. And then he'd left with one of the other women. "She's been calling people," my friend said quietly. "Trying to get your number. She says she made a mistake." I thought about the ring still sitting in my dresser drawer. I thought about the man I'd been the night I proposed. Desperate, hopeful, blind. If she calls you again, I said, tell her I'm not available. 6 months after I walked out of Rouge, I got a promotion at work, senior project engineer. A raise, my own office with a view of the inner harbor. My boss shook my hand and said, "You've been putting in the work, Marcus. It's time we recognized that." I thought about Simone's voice. "You make what, 70,000 a year?" I smiled. A year later, I met someone new. Her name was Aisha. She was a librarian at the Enoch Pratt Free Library, with a laugh that sounded like music and a way of listening that made you feel like the most important person in the world. We met at a community forum about affordable housing. She asked me a question about zoning laws, and I answered it, and somehow we ended up talking for 2 hours. On our third date, I told her about Simone, about the proposal, about the humiliation. Aisha listened without interrupting. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm glad she said no," she said quietly, "because now you're here." It was the simplest, truest thing anyone had ever said to me. We got engaged a year and a half later. I proposed at Fort McHenry, at sunset with no audience and no performance. Just the two of us in the quiet Chesapeake wind, and a ring I'd chosen because it reminded me of her. Simple, strong, beautiful. She said yes before I even finished asking. We got married 6 months later in a small ceremony at my parents' church. My mother cried. My father shook Aisha's hand and said, "You got yourself a good man." Aisha smiled and said, "I know," and I believed her. I never saw Simone again. I heard she moved to New York for work. I heard she got engaged to someone else, then called it off. I heard she started therapy. I heard a lot of things, but I never followed up. That part of my life was a closed door. I didn't need to keep checking if it was locked. Sometimes late at night I think about that moment in the restaurant, the ring open in my hand. Simone's laughter cutting through the air. The way I felt my entire future collapse in real time, and I feel grateful. Not because it didn't hurt. It did. Deeply, but because it taught me the most important lesson I've ever learned. Love isn't something you earn. It's something you're given freely or not at all. And the moment someone makes you feel like you have to prove your worth, you've already lost. I didn't need Simone to see my value. I needed to see it myself. And the day I closed that ring box and walked away, I finally did